Thank you very much and good evening. I must say, if I didn't know any better, I would say you moonlight as a sangoma because the launch of your book, the timing is so perfect. And I must say, your book also serves as a, it's an invaluable source, and tool for us as journalists and editors, given what happened in Parliament, as you have already alluded to that 2 weeks ago, and the recent leaks of the intelligence cables. In fact, tomorrow we are quoting you extensively in the Mail and Guardian. Please buy the Mail and Guardian. on your take on the process of selecting the intelligence Inspector General, and also on the leaks. Your book also serves as a caution and guide regarding the impact of securocratic actions on our profession and on journalists in general, and the dangers of us comfortably operating within that parameters of such environment, which includes the reliance on sources and selective leaks, which you have alluded to. And I agree with you that we haven't done enough as journalists into looking at the, I don't know how to put it, you know, this group of people who are really, before we know it, will be in charge of our state. I will give you an example. In 2001, when we had that President Mbeki was accusing Cyril Ramaphosa, Matthew Posa, and Tokyo Sehwale of trying to topple him. I mean, to us, it was just a story. We didn't look at the fact that actually, what is happening here? We are talking about President Mbeki, who is the defender of constitution and whatever, but he is now using Securocrats or a security fear to deal with what was actually party factional battles. And I agree with you to say that should have been a wake-up call to us. And also, looking back, the early 90s, if you remember the Marian report, which was also talking about a coup against Nelson Mandela. And sure, Nelson Mandela dismissed it. You know, it was a report by the then head of the Defense Force, General Marian. Mandela dismissed it as such. But if you look back at what Mbeki, I mean, one of my friends, can I call him friends, who was in the room when Mbeki was looking at the video of James Nkambule accusing Cyril Ramaphosa and Posa of all these kind of things. Everyone laughed at it and thinks, you know, it's one of those things, but Mbeki didn't laugh, which to us should have really kind of like wake-up call to say what is happening there. And you spoke about Zuma when coming to power, which I think also the invitation to hear, it creates the impression, which I disagree, it creates the impression as if he's also under the sway of this Securocrats. Zuma is a Securocrat himself. I mean, if you look at his rise to power in the ANC, it was through the party's intelligence department. And also in government, his battle with Mbeki, if you remember very well, I remember at one press conference where we asked the then Secretary General of the ANC, Halima Mtlante, to say, but where does Zuma get this information about what is happening in the party since he was suspended? And he said, but remember, he hasn't really stopped to being, from being a spook. And I must say, also 2005, which reminds me, 2005, when I was covering the Zimbabwean election, there was at one point when it was clear that Mugabe might lose, there was a talk in ZANU that Mugabe might concede and say, this is it. But apparently the generals were the one who were pressuring him, which also talks about the securitization of that country, which actually brings me to the question of saying, because in Zimbabwe, the generals there, it was not more of ideology or political interest, but it was more of commercial interest of the generals. So my question is also to say, is there a possibility that in South Africa also the commercial interest of these Securocrats can also be a factor in putting pressure on policymakers? And also, the other question which I would also want to put to you is that what is the role of the so-called apartheid era officers and officers in the police, the intelligence, and the military who came from other liberation movements other than the ANC? Would you consider their presence there as some checks against this Securocrat so that we don't slide downhill, or are they just indifferent to what's happening? That would be my question. And also the weakening of the civilian control remember when the ANC came to power, were adamant to say the military, the military and the police, there had to be some kind of civilian control, not just from political point of view, but from bureaucratic point of view. That is why you have the Secretary of Police and the Secretary of Defense. But as the time goes on, we went back to the apartheid era where the role of those people is just more administrative. Do you think strengthening their role will help to push back the Securocrats? And the leaks, why the leaks were given to Al Jazeera, I must say, we're disappointed and we're envious. And surely we don't have answer to that question. And on the spy cables, I must say the Securocrats were embarrassed, but they are celebrating because it gives them grounds, it gives them that justification to say, actually, President, where is that bill? It's gathering dust in your office. I think this is time to sign it. On the selective leaks, which I think is the chapter that I was focusing on, and I must say it was a wake-up call to me because it's something that, as journalists, we are just competing for scoops, and sometimes we forget that we are being used by Securocrats. Sometimes we forget that actually we are being tools. We are pawn in a bigger picture. The background to this is that South Africa is also becoming a closed society. I mean, I can tell you now, actually, before I came here, I was doing some unscientific manager survey in the newsroom to ask how many phones do you have from my colleagues. And you'll be shocked that no journalist in that newsroom had less than 2 phones. And if you look at the reason, is because another phone is not recut, so that's where we call the source, we used to call the sources. Sure, you can laugh about it, but it's really scary. In a country where after 1994, we were really saying that we are not going back to that era of a closed society, a secret society which is run by Securocrats and police, but especially political journalists, they will tell you that if you don't have a second phone, you are in trouble. That's one reason why the journalists rely on these leaks. I'm not saying it's justified. I will talk about the dangers and the disadvantage of that. Also, the secretive state. I mean, if you remember, Mbeki also was relying a lot on what he termed the National Security Council and Zuma security cluster. There was a very disturbing thing which happened in 2009 when, if you look at all the ministers, I think you might have read about it, if you look at all his ministers in the security cluster, all of them were, most of them, let me try to qualify, most of them were of Zulu origin or coming from KwaZulu-Natal, which was disturbing. I'm not saying that that means something, but I'm just saying that that was disturbing because it means you want trusted people to influence policy making. And also, I was told by a source, we rely on source all the time, that under Zuma, what you call domestic intelligence estimates, you know, the kind of looking at, you know, the broader picture when the intelligence guys brief cabinet has more shifted to political intelligence. I mean, if you are saying political intelligence and domestic intelligence, what do you mean? I mean, you are talking about spying on your own people, which is worrying. But also, I must not be defensive about the media to say also, we are to blame in a sense that we are relying too much on looking at the stories that are interesting to you, the public, but not of public interest. So as a result, we are looking at those scandalous stories from these Securocrats, and they really, some of them, you know, they really enjoy giving those leaks, but obviously with a motive. And without going on, I was going to kind of like look at the background of why this mistrust between us and the ANC, which also lead to that. But just to touch on it a little bit, it's more about when the ANC was underground before the unbanning. As you can remember, there was this mistrust because the mainstream press was mainly anti-ANC. Only the so-called alternative press, which the Mail and Guidance predecessor, the Weekly Mail, those were the papers which were prepared to listen to the ANC. So that mistrust actually continued even beyond 1994. I mean, if you remember, just to quote Nelson Mandela's speech, his political report in 1997 in Mafikeng, it was saying that the bulk of the mass media in our country has set itself up as a force opposed to the ANC. I mean, you still have that narrative even today. Sure, I can excuse Mandela to say Mandela was Actually, if you look at 3 years before his speech to the IPI in 1994, he was really pushing for press freedom. He was actually embracing to a free media, saying that this is one institution that will serve as checks and balances against any government. However, other people took the advantage of that mistrust and make sure that they use it for their own, they exploit it for their own interest. For example, the factional battles in the ANC, where you, towards every conference, you will hear scandals about this candidate or the other. And also the NEC meetings and the DA's Federal Council meetings, as you know, that as journalists we depend on these leaks, and sometimes we don't interrogate them because we want, as you have already alluded in the book, that we tend to, as editors, sometimes we tend to put pressure on reporters to get these leaks without interrogating them. And sometimes I don't care about the party factional battles, and I mean, they happen everywhere. But the problem is that when coming to the ANC, these things tend to spill and replicate themselves in the state, where the bureaucrats take advantage of that and start saying, what are we looking at? I mean, if you have observed on how the ANC is treating the Mail and Guardian, I mean, we are called right-wingers, we are called all manner of things, we are even told that our phones are packed. The dangers and the disadvantages of this, depending on these selective leaks, as you have alluded in the book, that the dangers of leak-driven journalism is that the media can quickly become the tools of competing factions in the ruling party, using them to rubbish their opponents, which is true. And this is one thing that I always say we need to be vigilant. And unfortunately, the commercial pressures, as you know, that the media, especially the print media, is really under a lot of pressure. The newsrooms are shrinking. I think you stated that in the book, that the newsrooms are shrinking. We depend on junior journalists. Sometimes we don't have a choice but to depend on these leaks. But the problem is, one is that it end up in violation of the code. I sit on the press council, and some of the complaints that gets to the press ombudsman is more about reliance on sources, and not sometimes not even sources. It's second-hand sources, someone who told you, and if you look at the stories, but there is no documents of evidential value to prove your story. There is nothing that says this story. So I must say I agree with you to say when coming to these selective leaks, we have to be careful because we are our own enemies. And in terms of violating the code, we're going to end up having a situation that you refer to where the same Securocrats and politicians will start saying that, no, bring back the media tribunal. And lazy journalism also is a factor. You have already said that we put pressure on journalists, and sometimes, like, you know what, there's only 3 people in the newsroom, what are you going to do? I've got a leak, I've got a document, I've got this, without saying, hey, what is the motive of the source? Who is this source? If it's a secret, what is he trying to achieve? And is he going to achieve those ends through us? So lazy journalism is also a fact. And the other thing is also trusting our sources too much. I mean, we have seen it with the factional battles in the NPA, in SARS, in the Hawks, in the police during the Richard Mutluli's saga, where you will see that reports coming from different papers, you could see that this is a faction that belongs to Ivan Pillay in SARS, this is a faction that belongs to the new commissioner, this is the faction that belongs to Jiba, this is a faction that belongs to, and the danger with that is that we are allowing people, anyone who says, I'm investigating Mdluli, I'm investigating Zuma, we are allowing what I call scumbags also to be protected and violate our constitution and our laws. However, the frustration is that the national security is now becoming an excuse to hide accountability. I mean, you have seen with the Ngandla, when we broke the story of Ngandla, the narrative, even from ministers who are, are in non-security clusters, such as Public Works, they were talking about National Key Act. And if you look at the National Key Act, which is the irony, the painful irony is that this is the act that some of these laws, they were used by the apartheid regime to be repressive, to arrest the same people who are now, when under pressure, and they're trying to run away from accountability, they will say, but the National Key Act. to say, but what is the National Key Point Act has to do with the fact that people want to know how much was used to renovate the president's house. I mean, when I was, during my time at the Sunday Independent, we had a story where Police Commissioner Ria Pega's call was intercepted while she was allegedly tipping off the Western Cape Commissioner Lamour about the fact that he was about to be arrested. Guess what? We are worried about the secrecy bill. However, she tried to use the predecessor of this bill, the apartheid one, the Protection of Information Act, to stop our story. So that also leads to this, to journalists really depending on these leaks. And also, as you have mentioned in the book about how Zuma also used the national security for to evade accountability on the situation at Central African Republic and not accounting to Parliament about deployment of troops. Lastly, the issue of protesters and opposition, as the protesting and opposition has been treated as a security issue. It's a problem. And also you could see that this comes from advice of Securocrats and not policymakers. For example, 2005, sometimes we forget, we use people such as Ronnie Castles, is my friend by the way, Ronnie Castles as the new defenders of the Constitution. In 2005, during the protest, he was intelligence minister then, and during the protest he said something like, the intelligence must investigate the cause of this protest. I mean, it took Halima Motlanthe to say, why would intelligence investigate after the fact? I mean, that's not your job. And these are our people who are crying out for help. But to us, that should have been a wake-up call to say, why will an intelligence minister investigate what to us is expression of democratic discontent? Like you said, that we moved from apartheid, we moved away from looking at protest as a public order situation, but as a democratic, people's democratic rights to express their discontent. I mean, if you remember very well, I think you touched on it as well, that when we covered the issue of Liv Shange, Liv Shange is the leader of the democratic movement, which was also linked to the miners, where Gwede was saying that she's a foreigner, she's here to destabilize the country. I mean, we're talking about one woman, 32-year-old, to destabilize the country, and to a point that Home Affairs tried very hard to bar her from entering the country or deporting her. And how we got the story, one of the people that I talked to just say, you know what, this woman is a foreigner, this is what she does, and we're going to make sure. He was telling me as if there's nothing wrong with it. And only to realize that, and only after we exposed it, then they started like backing off and whatever. But that's the problem when I mean, if you look at Zuma's State of the Nation, I know there's a Stalin in the house who's warning me about. If you remember Zuma's State of the Nation address, public protests were under policing, were not under, political protests, which is a worry. Lastly, I was talking to one of your colleagues to say, given the commercial pressure in the newsrooms and the fact that it's a reality that newsrooms are being slashed, perhaps this is the time for universities and the newsrooms to collaborate much, much better in order to tell the real story. I thank you.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.